In this video we'll deal with inventories. We'll talk about the importance of inventories, the use of inventories, and indeed the costs of holding inventories. Now this is one of a series of videos on this topic, and needless to say you should aim to view all of the videos. Let's start and let's talk about the forms of inventories within a business. First of all, we have raw materials. Companies hold raw materials perhaps for production. It could be various metals, or if it's wood, different types of wood, or whatever it is. Whatever the components of the final product are. These components are usually fashioned out of raw materials, and the raw materials may be held in stock. Clearly, if the company is production based, it will need raw materials. Sometimes companies may rely on bought-in components and merely assemble the components into the final product. But a lot of companies will make the components, will make the parts of the final product, and they will make these from raw materials. There's also a situation where companies must hold raw materials or different components or different items in stock which are really used for maintenance, repair and operating supplies. For example, in an engineering business, the company may hold stocks of oil. Now the oil is used to maintain the machinery, but that's used for maintenance purpose and to ensure the efficient running of the machinery. But yet the oil is in inventories, and a certain amount of oil should be kept in stock. Now that's just one example, but in different companies, in different production situations, you may find different items are held in stock which are essentially used for maintenance or repair of machines or repair of equipment, for operating supplies. Again, there will be a stock of these, so it constitutes a form of inventory. And then of course there's the work in progress. Now work in progress is when companies partly finish the product. They don't take it from start to finish all in one move. They may make a part of the products and keep that part or those components in stock, waiting to be used later. There are various reasons why this would happen. Perhaps machines have to be used to perform different functions, and the machines perhaps may be used at an intermediary stage in production but also used at the final stage, in which case the machines will be used to produce items, work in progress in this case, which will then go back to the stores and be booked back into the stores, and then some items will be taken out and completed on perhaps the same machines, taken to the final stage. But there are various reasons why work in progress may be held in stores, and we'll talk about these later. It could be simply that the company wishes to avoid any risk of having machines standing idle or labour standing idle, and instead of that happening in slack periods when few orders are available, the company makes items which are then stored in stock, and when orders subsequently come in, they're able to meet those orders far more quickly because they're able to take many of the previously completed items and integrate those into the final product. So work in progress is important for many businesses. By and large, the literature in business nowadays seems to emphasize the importance of seeing through work from start to finish, trying to avoid work in progress. And the reason for that is, of course, work in progress involves resources, financial resources, tied up and held in work in progress stock, and that is idle money, that is idle resource. So the literature tries to instill the idea that it's better, more efficient to produce from start to finish in one run. But having said all of that, work in progress is an item in the inventories. We'll talk about this later as well. Then of course there are finished goods in inventories. Companies may make items for stock so that when orders come in, they're able to meet the orders very quickly out of stock. But there are other reasons why companies may wish to have finished goods. It ensures a more continuous production process. So machines are not left idle, or workers are not left idle. So the company is able to continuously produce. Some of the items will meet current orders, and some of the items produced will go into the stores and constitute the stock of finished goods. So we have 4 different types of inventories that we can identify, and you'll see from this that the discussion is mostly based around manufacturing business, whereas of course in the modern world businesses may not have stocks or need for stocks because they are service based. Accountants or solicitors or many parts of the service sector cannot have a stock of raw materials. The solicitor, or the lawyer if you wish, the solicitor cannot continue to work continuously producing output which can be held in stock. That person will deal with a particular case as and when it comes in. So service-based industries do not have a lot of inventories, if any, but manufacturing do, and those are the various types of inventory we can envisage. Now, inventory related costs. Well, for a start, ordering or setup costs. There is a cost involved in ordering. The buying department, if there is a buying department, will want to find out who supplies the particular component or the raw material, and the prices, and where it can be purchased cheaper, and what are the conditions of supply, and there are costs, in other words. It's not perhaps a straightforward purchase. So there are ordering and setup costs. There are also inventory carrying or holding costs. Once an item is received and goes into the stores, in a sense that's dead money. That's capital which has not been used. The items have arrived, they've been invoiced and they've been paid for by the company, and now they're in the stores just sitting there. They're not doing anything. They're not contributing towards the cash flow of the business. They're not contributing towards sales. They're just waiting to be used. And whilst they're waiting to be used, in a sense they are idle capital. They're just waiting. So that is a cost. That capital could be used more productively perhaps elsewhere. And for that reason, companies try to hold as little as possible in the form of stocks. They don't want to overstock because that is wasteful. And again, we'll talk about this later. It's also the situation that the companies will wish to avoid what's known as a stock out. A stock out is when companies run short. If it's a manufacturing company and they're using a particular type of metal, particular dimensions and so on, and they need that metal to continue production, and they don't hold enough of it in the stores, then the machines will stop because they will run out of raw materials. Now that can be very costly because now labour and capital will be standing idle, waiting for a delivery of stocks. So the companies try to avoid a stock out cost. On the other hand, as I said earlier, they also try to avoid holding too much stock. So it's a balancing act. Make sure that the company has just the right amount to avoid excessive stocks, but at the same time to avoid the problem of a stock out should it arise. here we have this term opportunity costs, and this really is an economics term. In economics, it's defined as the cost of the next best alternative foregone. Now that's the definition from economics. It's the cost of the next best alternative foregone. In other words, when we have a choice or a decision to make, sometimes we have to give up something to get something else. And what we've given up is the cost of what we've chosen. Now that sounds complicated, and really we need to have a class on economics to see this one clearly. However, the famous example in economics is a diagram called the guns and butter diagram. And it simply says that the government, let's say, can only produce guns and butter. I know it's not very realistic, but just imagine a society where the government can only produce guns and butter. That's what the society can produce. Now, the more guns the society produces, the less butter it can produce, because it's only got certain endowments of labour and capital and land and the factors of production. So the more guns it produces, the less butter. Now, the cost of the extra guns is the amount of butter that's not produced. That's what we mean by opportunity cost. It's the next best alternative that's given up. So if you're studying a business course, then the cost of doing this business course is not necessarily the fees you pay, but it's the courses that you're not doing. You may be more interested perhaps in fashion or in media, but you know perhaps your career will depend on a good business qualification. So the cost to you of doing this business qualification is what you are not doing. It's the cost, the regret you've got, the one that you are not doing. And the same with stocks going into a company. When a company buys raw materials and puts them into the stores, into inventory, the capital that it's sunk in the raw materials, that capital could be used for something else. Perhaps modernizing the computer system in the offices, or giving the sales staff a new fleet of cars, or whatever it is. So the cost of the raw materials in the stores is what the company can't have. It's what it's given up in order to get the raw materials into the stores. There is an opportunity cost in holding the raw materials. So the true cost of the raw materials in the stores is what the company pays. That's what the invoice is for, plus what that capital could have done, what that money could have done had it not been spent on the raw materials. And that's what we mean by opportunity cost. Really, we need a class on economics to do it justice. Then we have the cost of goods themselves. Clearly, the cost of holding raw materials in the stores is the cost of the goods that's paid. So this is just the cash that's paid out. On top of this, we'd have to add in number 4 here on our slide, opportunity costs. And we'd also have to take into account the problems of stock out and the holding costs, the store's cost, the cost of the labour in the store, the space that the stores take up, and the ordering cost, trying to find where to buy the raw materials in the first place. So there's a whole series of costs related to inventory that need to be taken into account. Now, decisions in inventory management. Well, first of all, when to order. When is the right time to place the order? It depends on the usage rate of the particular resource. So if production is using a lot of raw materials and the stocks are being depleted very rapidly, then the decision has to be made when to order. Sometimes the decision when to order could be based on experience, and sometimes personnel in the stores have many years of experience and they know exactly when to place the order. When the order is placed, they must allow for lead time. Now, lead time is the amount of time that the order takes to be processed, to be passed on to the supplier, and for the supplier to physically get the goods to the company. That's known as the lead time. So that must be taken into account. It's not a question, generally speaking, of placing the order today and the goods arrive in the afternoon. That may be the case in certain circumstances, but generally speaking, there is a lead time to be considered. There's also an issue about how much to order. And here the balancing act again. To avoid a stock out, to avoid running short on the material and therefore holding up all the production system, which is very costly. But on the other hand, ordering too much simply means that the company is holding idle stock. So it's a question of just getting it right, and that again could be down to experience, or it could be down to information about the suppliers, their ability to supply on a certain day, the amount they supply, the discounts involved, the terms and conditions, delivery, logistics. So how much to order? That's the problem. Getting the balance right between overstocking and understocking. Now, types of inventory management systems. Well, there's the reorder point system. This is where in the stores there may be cards which indicate the amount held in the stores. And when that amount falls to some critical level, it automatically triggers a reorder. So the cards will then go to the purchasing manager, who will make a decision as to whether to purchase it or not to purchase it. But it's triggered perhaps from the stores, who inform the purchasing manager and the purchasing personnel that perhaps something needs to be done, that the reorder level has been reached. The time between orders may vary. It doesn't have to be that orders are placed at a particular time to be delivered at regular intervals. It depends on the production system and sales. It depends on how much is required, perhaps every month over the coming years. If that was known with certainty, which it can't be because the world changes all the time, but if it were known with certainty, then perhaps regular orders could be placed for deliveries. But generally speaking, it's down to experience as to when the orders are placed. Also, the order quantity. Should it be the same every time? Should it be varied? Partially it depends on discounts available, the time for the delivery, the lead time. It depends on many factors. But again, it should be reviewed by the purchasing department, by the buyers. It could also be that the stores have periodic review systems when they might do a quick stock check to see which items are running low, and then report to the purchasing section, to the buyers, as to which items need to be replenished. Again, the decision would be left with the purchasing department, because they will then perhaps do some research into discounts, lead times, availability, where to purchase, and so on. Now, the time between orders. Well, the time between orders could be fixed. If it's periodic review systems, then if they decide that they're going to go with periodic review, say review the stocks every month, then it may be that they're able to place small orders every month and just top up. But it depends on discounts from the suppliers for quantity ordered. It may depend on the terms and conditions associated with the orders. but at least every month, let's say, the company may review what it needs to purchase. Now the order quantities may vary. Some months they may need a lot of something, and the next month virtually nothing, and the following month some. So it varies. It's not a constant. It depends on production. It depends on what the requirements of production are. What does the production need? What items are being sold? What items are being produced? And if it's producing a range of items, then presumably some items will not be produced perhaps on a regular basis, maybe exceptional items, but the raw materials nonetheless and the components would still have to be supplied from stores. And there's also material requirements planning, MRP. This really, it's dependent on demand items. Material requirements planning is trying to get a fix on what the company is doing, what items are in demand, how the company is producing them, and what needs to be held in stock, given that the suppliers can deliver perhaps frequently or even indeed infrequently, depending on the conditions of supply. And it's trying to get a more rational, thought out plan for materials. But it's the subject matter of separate videos. This is the situation often portrayed in textbooks on this topic. We have a situation of the inventory level on the vertical axis going from 0 to 2000, and then in months we have this sometimes called a sawtooth diagram, because it's like a sawtooth. If you look at a saw, the blade may be cut on in this shape, so it can go on to cut wood or whatever it is. So in this case, over 2 months, the stock is run down uniformly, very neatly run down from 2,000 items down to 0 over 2 months. And in a perfect world, just as the last item is used, a delivery is received and the stock goes back up to 2,000, and then it starts to run down, and we get to month 4 when it's just about out again, and just as the last item's been used, another delivery. So a very neat sort of diagram, a neat way of looking at ordering. Unfortunately, it doesn't really accord with our experiences in the real world, when orders may be too much, too little. They may arrive infrequently, they may arrive at various times with no particular pattern. Depends on the conditions that the suppliers have or that they face. Depends on production. Production may not be uniformly in the way it's suggested here. It may not be uniformly applied in the way it's suggested. But it's a starting point for our analysis. It's a good way of looking at fluctuations in inventory. So despite the criticisms of the diagram, it's conceptually quite a good place to start. We also have priorities for inventory management, and this introduces us to the ABC concept. Now, items, well, 15 to 20% of items that account for 75 or 80% of annual inventory value. It's always the case, generally speaking at least, but it seems to be always the case that in companies some items are very expensive and some are quite cheap. So it may be that a small number of items are expensive, and therefore they will be under scrutiny from the store's personnel and also from the buying section, from the purchasing section, to ensure that they are properly managed, because they are expensive, whereas the other items may be a lot cheaper and maybe easier to find. Items B, well, these are 30 to 40% of items that account for about 15% of annual inventory value. They are still quite expensive, but not as critical as the A items. The A items are very expensive. B, not so much. And C, well, 40 to 50% of items that account for 10 to 15% of annual inventory value. So these are the much cheaper items. They, again, of course, will be scrutinized for their usage and the amount in stock and utilization and so on, but they're not as important. So it's always the case that some items in stock will be expensive, might be expensive metal, for example, that ultimately has to find its way into the final component that's been produced by the business. Some items may be a little cheaper, easier to purchase, perhaps available from a range of suppliers, and other items quite cheap. Nonetheless, the stock has to be controlled and it has to be monitored. And if we look at this ABC concept diagrammatically, we would find it's something like that. So the A items are the ones which really need a lot of attention, and B, well, they all need attention, they all need a lot, but just A is crucial. A are very expensive. We also need to look at this concept of the economic order quantity, the EOQ. So the cost of ordering is, or the total cost I should say, is the ordering cost plus the holding costs. It's the ordering cost, placing the order, the cost of the materials that are purchased, plus all of the cost associated with placing the order, negotiating the discounts and so on. And then there's the holding cost, the area of the stores that needs to be apportioned to the total costs of the business, and the personnel working within the stores, which may be more of a variable cost, although some personnel within the stores, because of their experience and because of their particular roles, may be viewed almost as a fixed cost because they are necessary for the efficient running of the store. So costs of holding stock could be looked at in terms of that small equation. Now the ordering cost, well, it's the fixed cost per order times the annual demand divided by the optimal order quantity. So if we take the fixed cost per order times the annual demand, so it's the fixed cost per order times the number of orders placed divided by the optimal order quantity, the number in the order quantity, then we'd have what we call FD divided by Q. Q is the quantity, F is the fixed cost, and annual demand is D. The holding cost is the annual cost per unit times the optimal order quantity divided by 2. It's the holding cost. It's an average, or it's taking the holding costs in two parts. It's the annual holding cost per unit times the optimal order quantity, and then dividing that by 2. So the total cost is just adding those two together. So there's our expression. Now, to minimize cost with respect to the quantity ordered, we would use something called a calculus. Now, you may not be familiar with this, it depends on your standard of mathematical knowledge. But if you just tolerate what I've got on the screen for the moment, what we say is here we differentiate cost with respect to Q, and when we do that we get this expression on the right. So we have minus FD over q squared plus h over 2, which is equal to 0 because we're looking for a minimum. Now, as I said, if you haven't got calculus in your armory, don't worry about it. You won't be expected to produce that. Nonetheless, if we take the expression on the right, minus fd over q squared plus h over 2 equals 0, and transform it, we'd have fd over q squared equals h over 2. Now we can tidy that up. So we'd have 2fd over h is equal to q squared. And q, therefore, is the square root of 2fd over h. And this is the economic order quantity. It's a very famous expression. You will encounter it a lot in your reading on inventories. It crops up all over the place. It's a very rational, almost theoretical figure. It's perhaps not used so much in practice, but it does underpin our thinking about the amount of orders that should be held. Go back to our diagram, our sawtooth diagram. Here we've got the same as before. Maximum level 2000 runs down over a 2-month period, and then it shoots back up. When it gets to 0, it shoots back up to 2000 and then runs down evenly and smoothly down to the next 0. But here we've got the average stock level, which is just halfway. Average stock is 1000. And the reorder point is listed on there. So the reorder point is at that point on the diagram because there should be sufficient time for the purchasing department to place orders and for suppliers to make deliveries, so that the company does not stock out. It does not run out of stock. So once the reorder point is reached, the order is placed, and meanwhile the company is running down the stock towards 0, and then the supplier company should make a delivery, and the stocks will go back to, in this case, 2000. So that's our model. We have our average there, and we have our 2-month period, and we have a reorder point which is under the average, generally speaking, and that will determine when the order is placed for replenished or renewed stock. Let's look at an example. Let's say we're given the annual demand for some item is 45,000. £3 per unit per year holding cost, and £150 ordering cost as well. So these are the figures associated with placing the order and holding stock. Insert that into our equation, the one we had earlier. So we have now Q, the economic order quantity, is given by this expression. Put that in and evaluate it, and we get 2,121 quantity. So that the quantity should be reordered at that level. Now it's a very rational approach. It's, as I said, it's very mathematical. It's an interesting approach. It's an indication of what should happen in an ideal world. Of course, we have to tinge this with the understanding that we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where things can go wrong. Suppliers may not be able to make the delivery on time. Suppliers' machines may break down, or their suppliers in turn may let them down. So the whole chain of supply breaks down somewhere. All sorts of adverse conditions may arise, and it depends on whether the company wishes to take the risk. So here the economic order quantity, which is that amount, should be placed at frequent levels throughout the year to meet the 45,000 annual demand. But as I said, it's a very rational, mathematical and precise calculation. The world in which we live, this figure may be varied for all sorts of reasons. As I said, this is one video amongst several on inventory management, but that's all we're going to deal with in this one. Please look over the video again, make some notes, do some additional reading on the topic. It's an important topic. It's one which is popular within the business education syllabus, and it's important to understand the principles on which it's based. And also, a final point, bear in mind that this is in a sense the antithesis. This is the opposite of just in time. Just in time would have no stores, no stocks held. The deliveries from the supplier will be just in time to go straight into production. So there will be no stores in a just-in-time system. This is a much different model. This one assumes that there is a stores, assumes that the items are stored in there, and production draws off the stores. So the stores is really a buffer. It holds the raw materials, the components, the semi-finished goods, the work in progress. It holds all of those, and production draws off as and when it needs. But that's all we're going to deal with. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.